Well, once again, welcome VVSD family. You know, 30 years has gone by since our mission began. And some of the original founders, some of those that created the spark that has grown over the years to become Veterans Village are with us today, and some are in the room. And gentlemen, would you please stand and be recognized for your service, please? For without your forethought and your determination and grit, Veterans Village would never have been formed, would never have continued on, because every day, especially at the beginning, there wasn't a lot of resources to work with. But here we are. I like to think that Veterans Village exists and continues to exist and provide the services to perform our mission because we were meant to be here. And it is my true privilege and honor to present to you the founder of Vietnam Veterans of San Diego, now Veterans Village of San Diego, Jack Lyon.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me in the rear? Michael, you hear me? All right, good. First thing I want to do is actually introduce the guys that are here representing the founders. There actually were 5 founders. We have one of them beside myself here, Randy Way. He was the original vice president, and you'll hear a little bit about what he's done. But outstanding guy, Randy. Thank you. Then we have Chris Ownby next to Randy. Wave your hand so these guys can kind of see you. And Chris was one of our early members, and he was noteworthy to us because he helped design the original logo. I don't know if any of you remember the old VVSD logo. And Michael Herndon, I understand, but Chris did the front part, so he was important. And then my friend Michael Kilpatrick. Michael was our, quote, legal officer because he was going to law school. And this was really something how we all started. The Sal Tarantino, working with the public defender for years and years. Sal was a member of the board and instrumental during the period of time, a couple generations of leadership later, when John Smith was running VVSD. Some of you guys, most of you all remember John, I'm sure. Pat Russell, outstanding guy, still in service. Pat was an aircav guy, was wounded in Cambodia. Pat and the fellow that left, Walt Rutherford, they organized our primary fundraiser, which was an all-service boxing team's smoker, which was a hell of a deal. And we had great support from the community. VVSD's always been lucky that way. But we had Kenny Norton here. Some of you guys remember Ken Norton and Carlos Palomino. It was a wonderful night. I think we netted $200 out of it. That was big money to us in those days. So Pat's done a great job, and he continues to serve. He's the lead on the mentor program at the Veterans Court. You may not know this, but VVSD had the first Veterans Court in the country at Stand Down way back when. And that Veterans Court idea has finally caught on, not only around the country, but here in San Diego, and Pat plays a key part in that. The mentorship is a key thing for the kid that bumps into the criminal justice system, to have somebody that's a little further down the path take the time and care to help them understand what's going on and hopefully turn their life around. So thanks for that, Patrick. Dr. John Natchison, most of you guys, everybody here I know knows John. But John was instrumental from the very beginning in the development of VVSD and its programs. So I just wanted you to have an idea who these guys are that were here. The other members of the original 5, besides Randy and myself, were Paul Grasso, and Paul played a really important part in our development. He was our treasurer, for one thing. But more importantly than that, when we talk about the jobs program, he got a taste of PIC-RETSI, the Private Industry Council and the Regional Employment Training Commission, which is now morphed into what they call San Diego Workforce Partnership. Paul started there as our ombudsman, and he ended up running PIC-RETSI at one point in time. He now runs this workforce partnership in upstate New York, so he's still doing good work. The other guy, the 4th member, would have been Russ Kelly. And Russ was a corpsman in Vietnam. He's the only guy I know that got 2 DUIs in country. Hard to imagine. So he was well qualified to help us when we got into the alcohol treatment program. We don't know what happened to Russ. I just hope he's still on the right side of the soil. And then the 5th member was Bill Mahidi. Most of you have heard of Father Mahidi. Just a wonderful man, sort of the moral compass, the grounding, so to speak. You know, the way I see all of this stuff dealing with veterans, and it's kind of a spiritual process. You know, this whole magic of VVSD, at least from my point of view, is a spiritual undertaking. And he helped us helped us see that. And that was an enormous gift. He's got a really interesting book called Out of the Night, The Spiritual Journey of Vietnam Veterans, which focuses on the effort here in San Diego. So if you ever want to verify what I'm going to say here, it's in print in Mahidi's book. Wonderful guy. So before I go any further, I just want to tell you how honored we are to be with you folks. You know, working at VVSD, I mean, it's fun. I'm sure you have a good job, a good wage and everything else, but it's far more than a job. It's, from my point of view, it's kind of like a calling. If you don't really care, if you're not into direct fire, eyeball to eyeball, heart to heart, you're in the wrong place, you know? But if you do, you found your place, and it's a wonderful place. So thank you for being here, all of you on the staff. That's super, super important to us. How this started, Patrick, you can go. He's going to Veterans Court. Thank you. This all started back, I was a lieutenant in the Marine Corps and lost a bunch of kids overseas. And when I got out of the Marine Corps in 1967, I really, you know, I was able to work. Work came easy to me. Running a business was an easy thing to do. But, you know, I had no idea really what I was doing, but I dove pretty hard into drugs and alcohol. And I had about a 12-year gestation period. And that's an important word. I hope I remember to talk about that as it relates to the OIF, to the kids today that are getting out of the service. Their gestation period won't be as long, hopefully, simply because of programs like this. But in the late 60s and 70s, there was nothing like this. And the VA was nothing the way the VA is today. It was a wildly different situation. And in 1978, I ended up in a psychiatric hospital and got clean and sober. It took a while. I set a record for duration of attendance, so to speak. And but I did get clean and sober in March of 1979. And I worked, as I said, I would fly back and forth to New York and teach at financial institutions. And on one trip back, I saw a Life magazine article, Where Are They Today? And it was 10 years after, you know, there were pictures of the kids from the Tet Offensive. All the famous war photos from Vietnam showed where those guys were 10 years today. A lot of them had died, unfortunately. But it showed all that, and there was no text. It was strictly pictures and, you know, names. And at the very end, there was a paragraph, and it said that the VA was starting a program to help the combat veterans from Vietnam. And with my little egotistical sense, I thought, well, hell, I'm sure I can be helpful. So I called the VA, and it was not the VA. The VA had not turned that corner yet. It was the Disabled American Veterans. And luckily, I found a guy that told me the truth. I called the DAV, and I was invited to a meeting on December 7th, 1979, at the Catholic Charities downtown, where they sort of bigwigs in combat stress PTSD were holding a meeting about starting the Vet Center program here in San Diego. The Vet Center program was an attempt by the VA to reach out to us because we were so angry at them for the, perceived way they treated us, whether true or not. And so at that meeting, I met Mahidi. He was the author of the Vet Center program up in Los Angeles, and he was moving to San Diego, where he taught at St. Augustine's and had been a priest down here for years. He was an Augustinian priest, and then went to Vietnam with the Air Cav and was a chaplain. And when he came back, he left the priesthood, became an Episcopalian priest, married and had 2 kids and blah, blah, blah. But one of the things he did was run the Vet Center. So a month after I met them in December, in January of 1980, he called and said, would I help him with another Vietnam veteran? And I said, of course. And so we went to a meeting, and I went to a place, and there were 12 guys there, and we all looked at each other wondering who it was that needed the help, not realizing it was each of us. And that was the very first rap group at the Vet Center here in San Diego. As time went on, Randy, my friend, gee, it's unusual. But in any event, he ended up in the same hospital I'd been in, and they called me to see if I'd help him. And of course, I went down and we became pals, and he joined the rap group. And immediately we understood how important recovery was to us. So we started or actually Randy had the idea to have our own in-house AA meeting and asked Mahidi if it would be okay to use the Vet Center to do that. Of course, he said yes. The rap group met on Tuesday. On Wednesdays, we had the first meetings of Triple Threat. Now, that's a long time ago, 31 years ago. Kids clean and sober, so am I. 31 years of Triple Threat is an amazing tribute to all the people that have gone through VVSD and to the staff that's always been supportive of Triple Threat there at VVSD. It's a wonderful thing. So in that first rap group, we had really interesting people, and it expanded. Jerry Stadtmiller, my friend, who's with you guys now, wonderful human being. You guys all know Jerry. And he actually, I think Mahidi taught you at St. Augustine's, didn't he, Jerry?
I'll say yeah, so you can.
Yeah, thank you. What a lovely guy, Jerry. I love him. So it's part of my story. He's really kind. So in any event, we were a pretty kinetic group. We had a lot of really powerful people in that rap group. People came armed and never bothered Mahidi. So if it didn't bother him, it was no problem to us. And a plan was hatched to attack the VA. Mahidi sort of, it was like a snowball going downhill. He sort of directed it off to the side. And my particular personal issue was I was responsibility averse. I ran a business, but the business was me. And I just didn't want to be responsible for other people. And he worked with me, helped me a lot. And then that's how VVSD kind of got started. And it started in my office. The name of my business was the Lyon Organization, Inc. And Barbara, my wife, was an employee there. And we used the Lyon Organization telephone number. We assigned a line to VVSD, and she fielded, suicide calls in the day when none of us were there. It was quite an amazing process. And the way VVSD started, this is my membership card. It was a membership organization, and it cost $10 but nobody was ever turned away if they couldn't pay. But it was the idea, the feeling was finding each other. And we grew one by one. You know, the saying, you know, I get a kick out of Father Joe, God bless him, with some of those phrases. He went to school on us because we were talking a hand up, not a handout, a long time before. And that's what we did. We found each other one by one. We learned how to trust. We learned how to exhale. You know, a lot of kids hold their breath, you know. And when you can finally get them into a room where they feel comfortable and somebody has their back, so to speak, you actually will hear an exhalation, which many times, even the kids, I'm blessed now, I work at the Wounded Warrior Detachment for the Marine Corps at Balboa, and the same thing goes on. They're us. It's just another generation, you know? But it's that same feeling when they can let the air out and stand down a little bit. That's the space. That's the magic of what can happen at VVSD. So in any event, we decided right from the get that what we wanted to do was focus on nuts and bolts issues. For us, those were recovery, 2 was jobs, and 3 was homelessness. So our whole mission revolved around us. And we were really lucky at the beginning, being here in San Diego. There was a peace memorial down at the corner of San Diego Avenue and Twig, right in the heart of Old Town. And it was, I don't know if many of you remember that memorial. It was the first one in the country. Vern Hupke, an active duty colonel in the Air Force, gave up his career to help establish that memorial for the dead from San Diego and San Diego County during the Vietnam War. It was built while the war was still going on. And it was fantastic. It had the same, you know, if you go to the Veterans Museum, the plaques are there, but there was a large statue of Jesus, and one of the things Randy used to do was go down to Detox before Triple Threat every Wednesday and pick up the veterans that were in Detox and bring them there so they could kind of relax a little. And one of the kids that we did that with was instrumental in getting the Archdiocese, Robert Griffiths, was instrumental in getting the Archdiocese of San Diego to deed the land under that memorial to us, to VVSD, as long as we would polish the plaques and look after the land. And we were glad to do that. Now that was an important location for us because, see, we were just a few guys, but we were speaking, and this goes to what Phil was talking about too, because we were speaking for 106,000 Vietnam veterans, and it was just a handful of us, you know. In a way, you know, a cynic would say it was like smoke and mirrors, but you know what it was? Existence was supporting us. We were meant to do that. And that little peace memorial allowed us a platform, physically, to attract San Diego. We would get the Marine Corps band, you know, Old Town, a lot of people walking back and forth, and you have the band playing. Pretty soon we'd have 300 or 400 or 500 people listening to what we had to say, you know. And one by one we found each other. Another thing we had going for us was a supportive mayor, Pete Wilson. He'd been a captain in the Marine Corps in between Korea and Vietnam, and he really wanted to be helpful. So he was, and we'll talk about that in a second. But he was a good friend. But really special friends that we had at the beginning were the Gold Star mothers. Now, you don't see that nowadays as much, but in our time when we were trying to be credible and, you know, speak what we saw as the truth, to have those women who had lost their children in the war standing with us in their little white outfits. I don't know if you all have ever seen Gold Star moms, but it's the picture of integrity. It's the picture of love, if you will. And they stood with us at every one of our little, hello? they stood with us at every one of our events down there on Memorial Day and Veterans Day. And the other group that was super supportive of us were the POWs, former POWs, and their families that had not returned, the MIA. So we had really powerful friends as we went along. We also had lots of challenges in those days. And challenges, you know, beyond what you would expect, like raising money and finding each other, you know, finding a place to be and so forth. Those are day-to-day challenges. But we had some challenges that were unique. One was the VVA, Vietnam Veterans of America, which is still in business today. It's a great organization. And the Vietnam Veterans of America was started by a friend of mine, Bobby Muller, also a lieutenant from Vietnam, who'd been shot in Dong Ha going up a hill and was a paraplegic, severed his spinal cord. And Bobby was one of the guys, I don't know, there's maybe people in here old enough to remember when Life did an expose on the VA hospitals in the Queens area of New York City, where they had like rats chewing on their bandages, these kids that couldn't move. He was one of those kids, and he had such a rage about that he turned that energy into the Vietnam Veterans of America and came to us and said, come on, you guys are perfect. You just be a chapter for us. And we thought about it hard and long, you know? Not really. And we said, no, we're a nuts and bolts organization. You know, Iran-Contra, the Nicaragua, the Sandinistas, there's all kinds of things to talk about. But we weren't into talking, we were into doing. And we were sticking with the nuts and bolts, and we were going to stay as VVSD. But what we did do to help them was we started a parallel chapter. We started a chapter of the Vietnam Veterans of America, 472. It's still here today. The first president was Robert Van Kuren. And for the founding convention of the VVA, Dr. Natchison, John, myself, Steve Mason, who was a phenomenal poet. If you guys ever get the chance to read or can find his book, Johnny's Song, which is the poetry of the Vietnam War, this kid was magical in his own way. Cuckoo, we call him. He was absolutely nuts, but he was a hell of a poet. And Cuckoo and the four of us went to the founding convention. I was lucky enough to participate in the opening. And Cuckoo opened the convention with a poem that is a magnificent thing. So what we learned how to do, and I'm so happy to see the board and VVSD still does this, is we knew how to play well with others. But we never compromised our mission. We never compromised our goals and values. So that was important. And we still have a good relationship with them. The second challenge came from a group called the VVLP, Vietnam Veterans Leadership Program. And that was a program that was put together by President Reagan and his VA people, so to speak. And the idea was that there is no problem. This is like, it was sort of combating the issue of the stereotype of the Vietnam veteran, drug case, baby killer, up on the roof with a sniper rifle, all of that sort of stuff, which is not who we were, of course. But, you know, their issue was there is no problem, and we knew there was a problem. There was such a thing as PTSD. You know, the DSM-3 in 1983 added PTSD as a diagnosis. When we started our comeback to the country, nobody knew anything about combat stress or whatever. You know, look at the difference between that and today. Well, in any event, the VVLP came to San Diego, and again, rather than look for a fight, we decided that we would work with them. And the first director of the VVLP was a guy named Dave Shimowski. Shimowski had been blinded in Vietnam. He was a tank platoon commander with the 25th Infantry Division. Wonderful guy. And he taught me a really, really important lesson, amongst other things. He came back blinded, got all the tools at the VA, went to law school, and now sits as a Superior Court judge. He's the arraignment judge, a hell of a guy, Shimowski. And he, you know, such a pure person that one day I was talking to him and I said something about, you know, being handicapped, and he grabbed a hold of me so hard. He says, "You don't call me handicapped. You don't call me disabled. I'm the only one that can do that. You'll never hear that from me." And, you know, today as I work down at the hospital, I remember that, because that's none of our business, man. That labeling and that putting people in little buttonholes and saying they're this, that, and the other thing. That's how we separate from each other. And the reality is we're all in this together and we need each other. So, that's all a message that goes on here. But VVLP became a great asset to us. It became the organization that helped us meet successful Vietnam veterans. And again, our friend Paul Grasso, one of the founders, he became an executive director of VVLP right after Shimowski. So there's a lesson there. Then the lesson is that there's always the flavor of the month, or the flavor of the year, I think, as Herman Cain said, something like that. But the idea is, you stick to what you do. You maintain your focus. You stay true to your mission. You stay true to your heart, and the other things will come and go. VVLP, after a big splash coming in, did some good for 3 or 4 years, and it's disappeared. VVSD is here. VVSD remains. That's an important lesson. So some of the early successes, you don't mind if I go through this? No, okay, sorry. Some of the early successes of VVSD, the things that I'm most proud of, there's lots of them, but the jobs program was certainly a really well understood one in our community. We found what happened was that Mayor Wilson had a press conference and announced that there were 1,583 jobs for Vietnam veterans, combat veterans. So we were really excited, and I was at the press conference. I said, yeah, that's great. It's nice to see a politician deliver and blah, blah, blah. And there were no jobs. There was an idea of jobs. And that's another important lesson to me when you're dealing with these combat veterans, with the guys and ladies that you see at VVSD, is do not overpromise. You underpromise and overdeliver. Well, they promised something that didn't exist. So Mahidi and I went down to see the mayor, and I made him wear his black collar, no pastels. Those Episcopalians, they wear the different color collars, We need black and white. And so we went kind of ballistic and made some demands that they agreed to. And the Department of Labor guy, I'll never forget this, at the meeting, he says, I got a death threat today. What do you think I should do? I said, I'd move to a hotel. So, this is, it makes sense to us, but to people that don't know, so Jesus, he said, whoa. So in any event, out of that frustration, there's always a silver lining, so to speak, if you allow existence to work. And out of that sort of disappointment of no jobs, they agreed to our demands. One was that they hire Paul, our friend Paul Grasso, as our ombudsman, and we drove a meeting every 2 weeks, and we had everybody at that meeting who had anything to do with employment for veterans, which would be EDD, DOL, all the service organizations that rarely talk to each other, VFW, the DAV, all the little guys that work around this issue, but they weren't talking to each other. So we got them in a table, and we delivered those 1,583 jobs and then some. And that was a tremendous success for this community. And one of the things that grew out of that was the United Veterans Council. All of a sudden, people realized what was our motto, which is, isn't it amazing how much can get done if you don't care who gets the credit? And so the UVC, United Veterans Council, and the San Diego Veterans Council Coalition are outgrowths of that particular jobs program. It was really a remarkable thing. And we learned a lot about setting the framework for finding employment. Kenny Ray's been here 18 years. He knows what I'm talking about. But back in the beginning, nobody understood that exactly. And amongst the first hires under that jobs program were John and Robert went to work for a place called Occupational Training Specialties. And they had the idea to come up with giving veterans vouchers, getting them the training they needed, whether to drive a truck or weld or do whatever was important, and then getting them OJT positions and finally a job. And it just seems so sensible. It's amazing. I don't know whether they're still doing that today, but they sure as hell should be. But that was a model that worked across the country. The second major success was the landing zone. And that was down at 11th and G Street. It was an old shooting gallery for heroin addicts. And we took that over as our first recovery house, the landing zone, downtown. And Russ Kelly ran that originally, and when there were some hiccups in there, Randy stepped in. He left his business. He owned San Diego Scaffold. He put that aside. He had that commitment and that heart. Went to the landing zone and ran that when it could have folded up, because we could have gotten in trouble with the county alcohol people and the VA and all the guys that were taking a bet on us. We could have dropped the ball, but we didn't, because somebody stepped forward, and that somebody was my pal Randy. The next major success that comes along with that is Operation Dust Off, up originally in the Hotel El Cortez. Let's see, the landing zone was 83 and 84. Dust Off was 85 and 86, I think, John. And it was originally at the El Cortez Hotel. And this was really a groundbreaking program in America, because no one had ever had the idea to find the homeless veterans, to go out and actually search for them, give them a place to stay, and train them into a job. And that's what went on at Dust Off. It was really a groundbreaking program. And our goal as a board at that time was, how can we integrate these two programs? One's down on 11th and G in a bad part of town, and Dust Off had moved from the Cortez up on the 5th Avenue across from the Abbey restaurant. And how could we get those two together? Because they were symbiotic. And so we found this property at 4141 Pacific Coast Highway that you guys now work at, you know? But that was a scary thing as a board, to sign that lease. You know, that was a hell of a commitment at the time. Now, the Marine Corps was happy for us to move in there, because that had been a hot sheet motel. And they were happy to see a change into a place with just crazy Vietnam veterans. So that all went good. But the thing was that we took that, we collectively took that risk, you know? We'd look at each other and we said, hey, it's not raining, nobody's shooting at us, what's the problem? Come on. And that's the experience that, you know, the guys you work with that come in from OIF and OEF as they move into our community, is they bring that same sort of ability, to make a decision. So that's a really good thing. So we did integrate those two down at 4141, which is now, of course, Veterans Village of San Diego. Another program that went on was another first in the nation, was under an Agent Orange grant, the Family Assistance Program. And, you know, for whatever reason, people never paid attention initially to the spouse and to the children of the combat veterans. Now, we understood that that was a particular challenge. And so this Agent Orange Family Assistance Program that, again, Dr. Natchison was a key part of, and that's where Missy, most of you guys, or some of you guys remember Missy Lyon. That was my former wife. She worked there at the Family Assistance Program with the kids, and then later at VVSD on the alcohol recovery side. So that program was another first in the nation. And then finally, of course, everybody knows about Stand Down. And Stand Down was an amazing success right from the get-go. But there's a couple things about Stand Down that a lot of people in this generation of Stand Down, now there's been 24. So at the beginning, it was a slightly different deal. It was a hell of a lot more risky because we didn't know what was going on. But one thing that happened was the VA had changed. The VA was now more sort of responsive to Vietnam-era veterans. I'll never forget, when Mahidi opened the Vet Center, he asked if I would come to the opening. I said, sure. So I went, and there was Chief Rainwater, who was the regional director of the Veterans Administration. And he's sitting behind the desk, which is okay. I mean, you know. So I went over to shake his hand, and he looked at me and he says, you have no idea what a real jungle is. You should have been in New Guinea. Now, he may have been 100% right. I think he was 100%. I don't know. I've never been to New Guinea. But it was a hell of an approach to say to somebody that thought he knew what a jungle looked like, you know? It was just an attitudinal thing. But by the time we got the Stand Down in '87, Dan Emer, you remember Dan? He was in charge. He had Rainwater's job there at the region, and he was open to this. And so that ability to play well with others really did phenomenally well at Stand Down. Two things quickly about Stand Down. One was the use of a thing called an FO, Forward Observers. And VVSD, you know, we raised some funds, and those funds were used to fly people in from around the country, from other veterans organizations, and say, after we got it going good, hey, you can do this back home. That's another one of these things about who cares who gets the credit. There's people in need out there. You go help them. I don't care where they are. And so the FOs were a big thing. The other thing that stands out to me was the Senate hearings on homelessness. When the state Senate of California came to stand down and set up a little hearing in one of the handball courts. And to watch these state senators, just a few of them came, but what the hell? But they listened as homeless after homeless vet took the mic and told them what it was like, you know? And I remember those hearings to this day. I remember Ralph Jones, one of our kids, saying the hardest thing was the lack of privacy, you know? I never get a moment where somebody isn't looking at me. You know, you can go home and shut the door. You can shut the door to your bathroom, be by yourself, do whatever. I don't get to do that. And I mean, it was, you know, it's such a powerful experience to see VVSD and these homeless, powerless people having an impact on the state of California. It was really remarkable. And the leadership that we've enjoyed, you know, this was sort of the launch leadership, the start of the thing, you know, that requires a certain personality and a certain whatever. But once you're airborne, you know, it's like launching a rocket ship or whatever, then you need skillful leaders to take over and continue the mission and ever expand it. And this place is blessed with a history of really capable people. You know, Robert Van Kuren, first time I met Robert, he came to one of those press conferences for the jobs program. The mayor's there, everybody's, the channels are all there, you know. This is Big Cigars and Motor Cars, you know, we're on TV. And in walks this yo-yo, dressed in camouflage with a black headband, and he's acting out in the back of the room, and all the cameras go right around to Robert. So I asked the mayor if he would hang out for 5 minutes, and I went up, I said, hey, come here. I didn't know what his name was. I said, come outside, I want to talk to you. I said, look, you're following something up, you have no idea what you're doing. If you come in there and sit down and shut up, I promise you that you will get a job. I could say that because I could have hired him, you know. I could hire him at my little business. I had Paul there. So what the hell, Robert would have fit right in. So that's how I met Robert. And Robert became our executive director, and he was is a creative genius in program design, you know. He's real full of beans, so to speak. He's like a popcorn machine with ideas. And we had just the right amount of discipline within the board that was able to take advantage of his leadership. Then Julius Allen, you guys remember Julius? Of course, Al Pavich, you know, and I'm sure I'm leaving out a few guys that were in there for a short period of time. Joe Mullane was another colonel in the Marine Corps. But then we got Phil, and we got this current board. And this is amazing, because this is a really important time in the life of VVSD, you know. I'm lucky enough to work with these kids. I've been down there since 2004 at Balboa, and I see these kids, and I see you and me, you know, the other combat guys here. I see us and who these guys are, man. And the way war works, the impact on the individual, the impact on the humanity, and how somehow in the horror of war, you know, we always talk about the horrible stuff, people getting maimed and all kinds of things going dead and so forth. But there's also a really beautiful part of war, the connection with each other, you know. You know, the Bible talks about no greater love hath this than a man lay down his life for his brother. Well, once you've tasted just a glimpse of that unconditional love, you're a changed person, you know. You don't really understand it. But if we design programs and have a place like VVSD that has the context and the space that the people can bump around in a little bit, you know, and find their legs and get their act together, how whatever metaphor you want to do. You give them a safe space to find themselves. And that, one of the things I've learned from these kids, and I kind of knew from us, was that we are responsible. The people. And these little guys that I work with every day down there, they're responsible to each other. That's how war kind of works. You don't fight for concepts. You fight for each other. And they found each other, and they're ultimately responsible and ultimately accountable. And that's the kind of leadership that our country needs now. So these kids that are heading this way, whether we want them, I'm telling you, there's been 2.2 million cycled through Iraq and Afghanistan. 1.4 million have left the service. Of that 2.2, over 1 million served more than one tour, So now 1.4 has gotten out. 750,000 of those have already gone to the VA. Of that, a large percentage have got reported some sort of combat stress issues. I'm telling you, there is a tsunami coming towards VVSD. So the board, I know, is already addressing these things. We got to make sure the nation addresses this with the proper funding to allow you to do this. And then, see, you already have the fences. There's a great story. I'll just take one more second. I'm sorry. But I was at I've done a lot of meditation retreats with Barbara and on my own too, where you're silent for 30 days at a time and you just sit and watch your breath and walk and watch your breath. And you do this, there's no input, nothing to read, 2 meals a day. It's really quite Spartan. It's a sort of Zen practice. And at one of those things, I woke up in the middle of the night hard, and I was having like a nightmare, and I couldn't stop the killing. And I woke up, and this killing it was like a hallucination, because I'm awake, but these people are still coming at me. And so I crawled down to where the guy running, the Roshi was, and I told him this, which is you're not allowed to talk, but I told him, and he said, go walk on the deck. So I went out and I walked on the deck. It was real cold in southern Utah, about 10,000 feet, beautiful stars. At first I walked real fast. I was super agitated. But pretty soon I remembered and calmed down, and after 20 minutes I went in and went back to bed. The next morning we get up at 4:30 for the first sit, and we sat for an hour, and I went back up to my rack, and there was the book open to this story. It's a book called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind by Suzuki Roshi. And the story is of this farmer in Japan that had this prized bull. And the bull was coveted by all his neighbors to cover the cows and so forth. But the bull was a problem because he was rambunctious. And he would knock the barn down. He would break the fences. He scared the farmer's wife and kids. And it was a problem. So finally he went to see the Zen master and asked him what to do. And the Zen master looked at him and said, give him a larger pasture. He still needs fences. He didn't say all this is my interpretation, but that was the end of that story. And I thought, my God, that's what my friend did. He put me out on the deck instead of in my little room, and I had space for what was going on in me. And then I came back to me. And that's the magic of VVSD. You guys have built the proper fences. Over these 30 years, you developed this toolkit and the skill set, and you're blessed with the good people. I see my friend Marilyn, all the great people here do a great job. You know how to contain this. And that is such a blessing and such a head start for these kids that are coming back from these wars, because they're going to need that.
Jack, I want to interrupt you just for a moment.
Go.
You've been talking and continuing to make the point. What's important is to get the job done. It's not important who does it. And I just want to bring everyone's attention to the fact that Jack Lyon is the embodiment of that principle.
Thanks. Thank you, Jerry. So there were some guiding principles that, we've kind of talked about most of them. One of the key things to me is to keep the focus on us. Don't worry, play well with others, but remember what you do and trust in what you do. And my experience with life is that if it's right, existence supports it. I used to think about that a lot. Here we are starting this little organization just all by ourselves. How will it work? It works because it's right. It's supposed to be here, existence, whatever word you want to say. And the last principle is probably the most important. And it's the sort of the founding principle of how we started this and the way it works today is that you never, ever leave anybody outside the wire. If you know where he or she is, you go get them, no matter what the cost is. This is not a calculation. That's the guts, that's the spirit of VVSD. And so on behalf of the founders, thank you for being here, you guys, and Merry Christmas.
Well, Jack, we can't let you sit down so quickly. I'd like you back up here for just a minute. Veterans Village of San Diego presents in grateful appreciation to Jack Lyon. From 1981 through the present, your life has epitomized the mission of VVSD, leave no one behind. Your passion, devotion, and vision directly touch each life that enters these doors. Each veteran in need, each family who reunites with a lost loved one. We thank you for your continued commitment to them and for your inspiration to us.